Well, what a pleasure to be here on this glorious day. It's always good to see the shining faces of the parents and grandparents and the slightly haggard faces of the graduating class who have apparently decided that it was necessary to spend one last night in the library, hard at work. It's always fun for a commencement speaker to relish the temporary but immense power that's been granted to him after 18 or so years of education for you all. The last obstacle you face is me. And I suppose if I went on speaking forever, well, I won't. None of you can remember the first speech you heard in kindergarten, but likely it had something to do with the theme of playing nicely together. And in a way, that's my message today, with the emphasis on together. This is a day for individual pride, yes, but it's also one of the last days in your life when you are by necessity, not by choice, part of something larger than yourselves. I can't hope to know you all as individuals. No one can, but I have some sense of you as a group. I've spent a lot of time at small liberal arts colleges like this one, which are the unique glory of American education and of which Grinnell is such an exemplar. And I've spent some time here, too, over the years. The way that a child draws their first picture of a house with 4 windows and a chimney, then that's their kind of platonic ideal of a house. My platonic ideal of a college is the image of Grinnell, because my aunt and uncle were the classics department here, or a large part of it, for almost 40 years. And I can remember so well watching them as we would come to visit. They were my idea of what professors were like, and they were great scholars. The family joke was that if my Uncle Bill was late coming home for dinner, Tim or Andy would be dispatched to the library to go find him, and there he would be, standing someplace in the stacks looking for yet another book. But above all, they were members of a community, of the college community, and they took it with great seriousness. And I can remember the nights watching students cram into their house for readings and study. Grinnell is a great place precisely because it is a community. And in fact, that's the remarkable thing about college. It's the 4 years in an average American life when you get to live as most human beings have lived for most of human history. That is, in close physical and emotional proximity to lots of other people. It's rare in our society except for college. And sometimes during that 4 years, it's a pain when someone is, I don't know, playing the stereo at 3 in the morning or whatever it is. But most of the time, it is the great joy when the old grads like me totter back for reunion and talk about college as the best 4 years of their life. They not really, and I'm sorry to say this, faculty, wishing that they could take Introduction to Sociology once more. They are remembering what it felt like to be in that community. And one of the great ironies of higher education is that we spend that 4 years preparing you to earn enough money that you never have to live that way again, okay? But you can be as creative as you want to be. And I hope that you will, because you emerge into a world of serious problems that can only be solved by joint action. One hesitates on a joyful day to talk about problems. But, in a sense, this is the day that any last training wheels come off, and it's at a moment when we desperately need you as full-fledged citizens, and so a certain kind of frankness is required. There are always troubles in the world, But there are two in particular that the generations before you are not only not solving, but making daily worse, and that will affect and shade your lives unless you're able to work to change them. The first is what we've come to understand now is the radical inequality in this country and in this world. This year, watching events in places like Ferguson, we got some strong sense that the American experience is not the same at all for everyone. But that's not just anecdotal. It's backed up by every kind of statistic you could ask for, and the numbers are painfully stark. Yesterday's newspaper carried the story that the 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune together have more money than 47.3% of the entire U.S. population combined. The bottom half of America has less assets than those 6 people. Yesterday's paper also carried the news that the 25 most highly paid hedge fund advisors in the country make more money, those 25 people, than every single kindergarten teacher in America combined, all 158,000. That gives you some sense of where our priorities at the moment are lying. Now, a few of those people are, of course, redeemed by their generosity, though on average, rich people are less charitable than poor. But even so, this is not healthy for the society in which we live. And of course, if you look at this globally, all of us hold roughly the same position to much of the rest of the world as those Walmart heirs hold towards us. You're now equipped, all of you, to try and join that top tier if you want to. In fact, most of you will end up, if not in the stratosphere, then in 1 or 2 orbits down. And the question is how you'll react. By closing in, by choosing the gated community, or by reaching out. And the second crisis that we face illustrates why the stakes are even higher than with Gilded Ages in the past, why reaching out will be so important. The second crisis, of course, is the physical one. Climate change is the overwhelming reality of our time. College commencements go back to the 11th century, but until the last few springs, all of those college commencements took place in what scientists call the Holocene, that period of benign climatic stability that coincided and not coincidentally with the rise of human civilization. Not yours. In your lifetimes, the most important thing that has happened is that this planet crossed over some invisible boundary from the Holocene into something else, maybe what scientists now call the Anthropocene, the world made by man. How is the Anthropocene going? Not very well. Last week came news from NASA that the Larsen B ice shelf, slightly larger than Rhode Island, is apparently poised to tip into the ocean in the Antarctic. You've seen the pictures in the last few months from California enduring a drought unlike any that's been recorded in the past. And of course, as usual, these things are bad where we are, but we have enough money for the moment to cope with them. In the rest of the world, they're an unmitigated disaster, what Desmond Tutu, the great Nobel laureate and freedom fighter, called the greatest human rights challenge of our time. The thing that makes this so tragic is that it is no longer necessary. The best thing that's happened in your 4 years in college is that the price of a solar panel has fallen about 75%. The engineers have done their job and made it possible for us to imagine a world that runs in a very different way. We could do this. Denmark, yesterday, generated 115% of the power that it used from the sun and the wind and shipped the extra off to the rest of Scandinavia. It is possible to do this. As we can tell, Denmark has no monopoly on wind. But at the moment, it's not happening, this transition, fast enough to matter. And it's not happening because of that same pervasive inequality. The fossil fuel industry is the richest enterprise that human beings have ever conceived. And those riches have been used to keep us from making that transition with speed. The richest man on earth is actually the two Koch brothers, for instance, oil and gas barons whose net worth taken together blocks or outshadows anybody else. And they have amounts that they will spend $900 million of that fortune on the next presidential election. A lot of it will be spent here in Iowa. And they will spend it to make sure that nothing changes. They'll spend more money, that is, than the Republican Committee or the Democratic National Committee on the next election. It is hopeless to try and outspend the Exxons and the Shells of the world. So the answer has to be citizenship. Aggressive, engaged, occasionally impolite citizenship. You are all well trained now to do something useful from 9 to 5, or 9 to 6 or 7 probably in your first job, okay? I'm not worried about that. It's your evenings and your weekends that we need some of, the time when we do the work of citizenship. Once in a while, that means voting or electioneering, but usually it means figuring out how to come together to apply pressure on our systems the other 364 days of the year. Because these are not individual problems. It is a good idea to change your light bulb. I have solar panels all over the roof of my house, and I drove the first electric hybrid car in my state, but I do not try to fool myself that we are solving climate change those ways. This is a structural and systemic problem, which means that the answers are structural and systemic. I'm reminded often of a friend of mine, a guy named Gus Speth, who had perhaps the most golden resume there'd ever been. He had founded the Natural Resources Defense Council. Then he worked to work as chair of the President's Council on Environmental Quality. Then he headed the United Nations Development Program. Then he was dean at Yale. I got to spend the most time I ever spent with him, about 48 hours, in Central Cell Block in D.C., where the two of us had been arrested at the first protests against the Keystone Pipeline. And at a point in the course of that 48 hours, Gus, by then in his 70s, looked over at me from the next cell through the bars and said, "You know, I've held a lot of important positions here in Washington, but none of them seem as important as the one I'm in right now." This doesn't mean that all of you need to go to jail, okay? Nor does it mean that those older among us are exempt from the challenge. In fact, though young people are leading most of these fights, it probably isn't the greatest single thing for your resume to have an arrest record right away. For the rest of us, once you're past a certain age, what the hell are they going to do to you, you know? Something, by the way, goes triple for anybody who happens to have tenure. You don't all need to go to jail, but you do need to be citizens of all kinds of communities, including, very shortly, alumni, citizens of this Grinnell community where you've been in residence but now will be in the diaspora, but still connected and still connected to your college. We're very hopeful that Grinnell will come to join this divestment movement from fossil fuels that's marked Stanford and Syracuse and last week the University of Washington and so many other places. It's beautiful to see, as the Rockefeller family, the first family of fossil fuel, said last September that the most important step they could take was to sell off their family's investments in coal and gas and oil in an effort to weaken the political power of that industry. But you also need to be citizens of the country and of the planet, and you are at a great moment for which to do that. The sudden advent of the internet, it seems obvious to you, but to all the rest of us, it seems still like something very new and unusual. The sudden advent allows you to imagine connection in a visceral way that people before you have not been able to. Don't think that you can change the world by sending each other email petitions. You can't, but you can take that beautiful connection and use it to go to work in the real world. All of it only works if you are part of something larger than yourself. Faced with the kind of crises that we face, the most important thing that an individual can do is to not always be an individual, to join together with others. And here's the paradox. In my experience, that joining together with others leads to the most deep and hopeful pleasures that you will find. There was a story in the paper last week about a survey of lawyers around the country. And what they found was that those who were happiest were the ones who were making the least money, the ones who were working in some kind of public service law. Now, it's all relative, of course. They're lawyers, so they're not starving. Everybody's doing fine. But the ones who were devoted to something else were finding deep satisfaction. Your task is not to be poor. Your task is to think about where riches lie and to see if perhaps the answer isn't that they lie with others. We're all of us who are old now, we are all so grateful for the work and intelligence and good humor and spirit that has brought you to this point. What we up here and behind you among the ranks of your parents and grandparents, what we know, if we know anything, is that all of us are in this together, and so we are overjoyed that that us is today so magnificently enlarged. Congratulations.